Hello to all my queers and dears, and welcome to Punching Back, the Acceptable Punching Bag Defense Podcast. The acceptable punching bag is a term I've coined to describe a social phenomenon in which a consensus around a piece of art, a character, a creator, or other object of discussion is established that it is so bad that bullying, harassment, and cruelty are acceptable, or at the very least, understandable. If you've ever enjoyed something but felt like mentioning it in any given space risks someone going off on a rant to tell you why it's awful, you've experienced the acceptable punching bag. Today, we're going to be talking about Rwby and see if we can't punch back on some of the common discourse around it with some meaningful positivity. I'm Adam, and I run this channel.
I'm Ryan Bardock Z. Call me Ed. I'm the editor of the Acceptable Punching Bag podcast. Pleased to meet you.
And I'm Eric. I'm also Hugh.
And today we are talking about Rwby. So, first things first. Let's talk a little bit about our personal history with the show and the history of the show in general, and then get into the general idea of what the controversy is and why we're talking about it today.
So I just watched all 9 seasons specifically for this podcast, so I'm extremely new to the discourse, but I can say that I love the show and can't wait to get into it.
I myself have been familiar for the show for around its infancy during 2013, 2014. However, I only really got into it back in 2018, around the time of BB Tag and when Volume 5 had just wrapped up. So by this point, 8 years. Yeah, 8 years I've been with this series.
And I got into the show around Volume 2. I've always kind of struggled with mainstream anime, although I am working on that thanks to some recommendations from Ed here. And a friend of mine who was really big into anime recommended I get into Rwby, and I've loved it ever since. That was all the way back in Volume 2. And I just love this show so much. It might be my favorite, general story ever, but certainly I think one of, if not my favorite shows.
When it comes to shows that are very dear to me, only 3 in particular really hit the same bar that Rwby does for me. The others being Dragon Ball, Full Metal Alchemist, which is my favorite anime, period. And that goes for both the O3 and Brotherhood. I love both versions. And Gurren Lagann. Those are the only 3 shows that really hit the same level of emotional impact that Rwby did to myself.
You know, we're all very familiar at this point with the show. We've talked a lot amongst each other about the various common narratives in the discourse and how they interact with the show itself. Obviously, we don't want to completely dismiss criticism. One of the things that unfortunately gets talked about a lot is the idea that the people who love the show can't take criticism. And I don't want to give too much airtime to that kind of negativity on this particular podcast, but I also want to make sure that we acknowledge that there is that narrative out there, and I don't want to I think that this conversation is going to include acknowledgement of the things we think could have worked better as much as the things we love. And I hope we can model that for people.
Yeah, I for one, I know we're going to get into way more depth with this later, but just up out of the gate, I want to say that I don't, I'm with the critics in terms of the White Fang arc. There are definitely some, missteps and things that could have been handled with more tact, but, the only thing I will say to that is that the show is more than the White Fang arc. It is so much more than that.
But yeah, for sure.
I would say the same, but I'm not super knowledgeable about stories about racism and how that's handled.
Yeah. We'll return to the White Fang arc plenty, I'm sure, across this conversation, as it is one of the most relevant criticisms, and, one that I think is, as we just said, a lot of validity to critiquing that particular arc. But as you said, Eric, there's more to it. So we'll save that for later because it's such a big conversation. Let's start with some of the other topics for now. For those who don't know, the reception to Rwby is in many ways split between some extremes. There are the people who love the show and think about it all the time and are deeply emotionally impacted by it. And, and then there are a lot of people who, for some reason, find it almost insulting to them. And we want to make sure that we are able to provide some alternative narratives to some of the most common talking points. One of the big things that people talk about is that the show changed in a way that they felt was not for the better. For those who don't know, Rwby was originally an idea created by the incredibly talented animator Montiom. Rest in peace. He was a brilliant talent. He was hired by Rooster Teeth mainly because of his animation Haloid, which included a fight scene that was just off the walls between Samus from Metroid and, sort of Master Chief, but ended up being actually a woman under the helmet. He also was very popular for his crossover series, Dead Fantasy.
I can handle Dead Fantasy since I'm more familiar with the franchises he uses there. So yeah. You can leave that part to me. Okay, so Dead Fantasy is a crossover or miniseries that Monty made before Rwby, and I think even before he did Red vs. Blue. There's 3 series that he uses for that series. There might be more that I'm not aware, but these are the 3 I know for certain there are. Dead or Alive, Final Fantasy, specifically from 7 to 10, and Kingdom Hearts. So, when Dead Fantasy is basically a free battle royale with all of these 3 franchises, that never got a proper conclusion as far as I'm aware, but it didn't need to, at least to me. But in terms of what it did, it basically showed just how talented Montium was as an animator, despite the limitations of animation back then, specifically 3D. I know we're very accustomed to how 3D animation looks nowadays with Blender and shit, but back in the mid to late 2000s, even early 2010s, 3D animation was not easy. I mean, it's not easy now, I can confirm that thanks to a friend of mine, but back then, so much worse. Models were a lot stiffer, facial experiences were basically non-existent, the software just didn't allow you to too much creativity. And so unless you were part of a big studio like Disney/Pixar or even DreamWorks, you probably wouldn't bother with 3D animation back then. Yet this giga chat of a man fucking did it. Again and again and again. Despite the limitations, and even almost 20 years later, Dead Fantasy is still mind-blowing to watch. And I argue the same goes for Halo. He might have done something before, but as far as I'm aware, Halo was the first real big thing he did.
So Rooster Teeth came across his work and decided to hire him. He spent a few years working on Red vs. Blue. And then, because of his success and his popularity, Rooster Teeth said, hey, would you like to make your own show? And Monty came up with some ideas. He had some friends he talked to, like Shane Dawson. And then, of course, when he was ready, he went and talked to Miles Luna and Carrie Shawcross. He was very open about the fact that he is not a writer. He recognized his own limitations and his own strengths. His strengths were in animation. He loved it, and he had a lot of ideas. He was an idea guy, but he knew that writing was not his forte. So it's really important, as we talk about this, to remember that Monty deliberately sought out Miles and Carrie specifically to help him create Rwby. They were co-creators in every sense of the word. Now, let's get back to the production of volumes 1 through 3. First of all, Rooster Teeth didn't have a proper animation division until around volume 3. So when you look back at, the animation of volume 1 and even volume 2 to an extent, it's very rough, and basically it's because, A, Rooster Teeth was always operating on basically a shoestring budget, and B, they didn't have an animation department yet. So
if you ask me, I would not have been able to tell based on how good it actually looks. I would not have been able to tell they did not have an animation department at all.
Yeah.
So that alone is incredible.
Yeah, and like I said before, or mid to late 2000s and even early 2010s, 3D animation was not the big juggernaut Specifically indie 3D animation, I should clarify. 3D indie animation back then was not the juggernaut that it is now. They did not have the tools to do the shit we can do now. You were never gonna see something like The Amazing Digital Circus back then.
Then, unfortunately,
Monty passed away
Monty Owen passed away.
due to severe allergic reaction. He caught an allergic reaction like a week before his passing, and then he did pass away on February 1st, 2015, which, just to add insult to injury, was my brother's birthday, so thanks for that, world. It was, I believe, during the production of Volume 3. For those who don't know, most people who are, at least when watching Rwby Weekly, back when it was premiering, most of you are probably used to premiering during November's up to February, right? Because that's how it is. Volume 3 was like that, Volume 4 was like that, 5, 6, 7, 8 were all like that. The only exceptions were Volume 9, which we'll get to later, and Volumes 1 and 2, which were through July until September. So basically a summer anime. But because of Monty's passing, they of course could not release Volume 3 during the summer. That wasn't possible anymore. Considering Monty was the one who basically founded a project, and he was the animator guy, he wasn't just good at animation. He knew, like, okay, this is gonna be off topic. You know how Avatar is often praised by choreography and how the animators behind it actually study like actual real life martial arts and movements? Monty was that on crack. He was that guy. Not only would he animate now, he knew how to animate a fight well. But yeah, needless to say,
It was a hard time for everyone involved. And Volume 3, Monty was involved in the outlining of Volume 3, but unfortunately was not part of most of the production.
I think the only bit we know for sure he did was Yang versus Mercury. I think he did some other stuff, but it's not that stuff we know for sure he did for Volume 3 before his passing. It was Yang versus Mercury.
So, because of some of that, the massive change in the direction of the show, or at least what appeared to be massive change in the direction of the show, which I'll get to in just a second, was very controversial to a lot of people. Basically, Volume 3 ends with this huge climax that fundamentally alters the entire status quo of the show forever. The first 3 volumes take place in Beacon Academy as a semi-traditional, high school superpower anime kind of thing. But what they did differently was at the end of Volume 3, the Academy gets completely destroyed. And the main characters go out into the world now very unprotected by any adult figures that might really offer them the guidance that they so desperately need, and they have to figure a lot out for themselves.
If I could say my piece for a bit, because
Yes.
You'd be surprised how often the big school setting gets either destroyed or left behind during a point of the show. You'd be surprised how often this is played out. Sometimes the school never gets destroyed, but when it does, it's usually like halfway through the story, or it's treated as like an endgame thing where the school gets attacked or something. My Hero, I believe, is like that, because the war shit, it's the endgame, and the academy as well shit. But in the case of Rwby, instead of being like halfway through the story or treated as an endgame thing, it's basically the end of Act 1. Or better yet, the end of a prologue, because like, you can view...
It's basically the inciting incident for the entire plot to follow.
That! It's that! What Eric said.
Yeah.
It's practically the inciting incident, the thing that kicks everything into motion. I mean, there's a lot of like build up and foreshadowing to that moment in villains like Roman and Sindhu beforehand, but there's still even Adam, I guess, is in those first 3 volumes, isn't he?
He is. He makes a cameo in the finale of Volume 2, which I have some words for that. And he plays a big part in the end game of Volume 3. But again, we'll get to that. But yeah, you'd be surprised how rare and how risky it is to destroy a big setting like this that early on. You don't get that. Like, obviously, in most fantasy stories, you will have, you're like, oh, your typical hero village gets attacked, but that's like the intro. You will rarely get like a 7-season show and spend time in the first 2 seasons on said village, and it gets destroyed very early on. That usually happens around the middle of the show or the end. Never that early. Like, Beacon does this thing where it gives us enough time to care about it, but it also takes it away way too soon, which makes the fall hit much harder. Which is not something I can say to, like I said, oh, the village of the hero gets destroyed in the intro. Like, we don't get that same feeling there, like we do here at Beacon. We care.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's rare. To do something this early on. Like, that's a risk. Before Eric continues, this is one big theme I really respect in a matter about Rwby. Risk. And a theme of risk.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, yeah, that's something I honestly really admire it for, is just for taking that risk and doing something different. Like, actually, letting us see these kids as kids is actually something that you don't really see very often in this genre. Like, seeing them as kids.
They are kids, they act like kids, they are treated like kids, they are kids.
And then shit hits the fan and they're still the same kids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
and they're
even
figuring
Avatar-
out how to go forward. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like even Avatar, which, you know, Avatar is Avatar. Like, yeah, you see Aang do a lot of childish stuff, but the shit hit the fan before episode 1 even starts for him. And Katara and Sokka basically grow up pretty fast, as all things considered, just by matter of comparison.
Exactly. It's not treated the same way as it is here in Rwby.
Yeah. There is obviously very much a certain amount of, in Avatar: The Last Airbender, of recognition of characters growing up too quickly. But it's also, like, for example, Zuko is sort of treated more, Zuko and Azula, both, are treated, almost more like 20-year-olds than teenagers.
Azula especially is not treated as a teenager she is. I think Azula's the worst offender of that. Everyone else, you can sort of think, okay, this is a kid. He acts a bit older, but he's still a kid. Azula, no.
Okay, I would like to clarify, though, that I did not bring up Avatar to boost up Rwby by taking Avatar off its pedestal. That was not my intention.
No, of course not.
I'm just using it to point out a norm that Rwby is intentionally violating.
For sure. So, yes, going sort of looping back around, Volume 1 through 3 had a very specific bubble that it operated in, that it also intentionally burst. And by all accounts from behind the scenes, this was always what they were going to do. And there's a lot of us who certainly see the seeds that were planted in Volume 1 and Volume 2 and all that. Unfortunately, there is a certain amount of people who feel that once you get to Volume 4, the show takes a sort of nosedive in quality. And this is sort of where you start getting a lot of the discourse that we want to talk about. Not that there wasn't some before. This is an important thing that people don't really talk about, but there was absolutely negativity before. It wasn't purely all positivity. Like, there was always a negative crowd around Rwby, even before this big split and this big change.
Rwby negativity, it always kind of exists, but it was never this super duper big problem until after Volume 3. And it just got worse, which we'll get to in a moment.
Okay, so point that I feel has been implied, but I'd like to spell it out just to clarify. So what I hear you saying is that there's sort of a correlation between Monty Ohm's death and this massive shift in the tone of the show, this seismic shift in the status quo, and people assume that that happened because of Monty's death rather than being a coincidence in a plot that had already been outlined.
Yeah, so basically, there seems to be some kind of idea that after Monty's death, Miles and Carrie changed the direction of the show. Or at the very least, that they were now missing the main creative force that made the show good. And one of the things that people end up pointing to is the downgrade in fight scenes. because that was something that did really draw people in. That was Monty's thing.
That was the thing that dropped Rwby in. Not the story, not the characters. It was fight. Fight, fight, fight.
All of the trailers were just scenes of individual characters showing off their fighting styles.
Yeah.
The main thing people draw Rwby over, fight, fight, fight. Fight by Monty. Monty gone, no good fights, Rwby bad. There's obviously more to that, but...
Yeah, essentially, that was part of the issue. And of course, we also need to address the fact that in Volume 4 and Volume 5, they switched to a completely new animation software. Between Monty dying, having to, switch to this new animation software, changes and mismanagement at Rooster Teeth. As we know, there was a big crunch issue, and in Volume 5, Gray Haddock, who was the head of animation, siphoned some budget stuff from other animated shows into his show Genlock and sort of abused his position. There's some evidence of that kind of thing happening. Unfortunately, it did cause a significant downgrade in a bunch of the animation that unfortunately just happened to line up right after Monty died, and then as they were still trying to figure out how to shift to new animation software and all this stuff. So together, there was a lot of stuff that sort of created a perfect storm that people ended up being sort of pointing to as this is why Rwby is not good anymore.
If Volume 4 and Monty's death raised red flags for people, Volume 5, that was the final straw for them. Like the big final straw. And obviously, now we know, because Gray decided, let me get all the money and put it on a show. Like, regardless of your feelings, doing all of that just for a 2-season show that did not do very well, like screwing over your main base of your company. Because Rwby was back even now. Well, not even now because Rooster Teeth is no longer here, but Rwby was like the face of the company. It was the thing people thought of Rooster Teeth for. So to basically screw the series over, only to make a show that didn't even do very well in the end, not the best decision in the world. Point is, all of that combined basically made people think, oh, Rwby lost his way and is not as good anymore. Like, all of that hit during Volume 5 are going to be the most controversial volume of the series. Like, you could say Volume 7, even 8 are the most controversial. Some would say 9. I'd say Volume 5 is the most controversial.
Yeah, because that was the height of the climax of the White Fang arc, which I guess is kind of unavoidable now.
Yeah.
I guess we can put a pause to this bit for a moment and go to the other big controversy of this series. Racial storytelling!
Oh boy, I guess we're doing White Fang now.
Before we begin, I do want to clarify something. I am a Latin American Brazilian, so I am not the best person qualified to discuss whether or not a story of prejudice and racial commentary is good or not. I can offer my input, but in terms of how well it's represented, I cannot do that because I have never suffered any kind of, at least racial prejudice. I've never suffered any racial prejudice or anything of the kind. So I cannot speak from that lens.
Unfortunately, Eric and I are white as well. So there is a certain reality here that we need to acknowledge, which is that we are not speaking on this from the perspective of people who have experienced racial discrimination.
Yeah, and that's kind of the reason why I'm not really going to meaningfully push back against the main criticisms here. Like, I see it, my background in media studies, yeah, I can recognize it's there, and I don't really know what to tell you. If it turned you off the whole show, then yeah, no, it's never really brought up again.
It's not.
It's also, yeah, no, this is the one aspect of Rwby that I'm going to acknowledge that the critiques are valid on. But we should probably get into what those are.
Yeah.
I feel like we're beating a horse that hasn't even been born yet.
I think we should begin to explain what the White Fang actually is before we discuss the criticism themselves. I think that's a good start.
So the show has these people called faunus, fantasy race with animal characteristics. That's what faunus are, basically. And within the world of Rwby, they are an oppressed minority. Now, to its credit, the show does show faunus discrimination in different forms and intensities. like that is something like you'll see it manifest differently in different regions, and that's something that it does kind of interestingly, if nothing else.
For Veil, it usually doesn't get past certain bullying. For Mistral, it does have no fondness signs, but from what we've seen, nothing too severe. Vacuole, it doesn't give a shit. It doesn't give a shit about your race. You're strong? Cool. Join in. You're a fondness? You're human? Don't care. You're strong? Can you fight? Yes? Good. Welcome to the crew. And
But then Alice has honest dying in the mines because nobody gives a shit about them, but is fine exploiting them for cheap labor.
that.
Anyways, you were saying, Eric, yeah.
So yeah, point being, okay, so you have honest discrimination being a thing that is shown in different levels and intensities in different regions, which yeah, that's kind of realistic, or at least believable. But then the only activist movement that is specifically for faunist liberation, they also have their own country called Menagerie, which odd that they would pick that name for themselves though, because Menagerie is like a menagerie is a place where you go to. It's like a zoo, basically.
I don't believe they chose it themselves, actually.
It's never been confirmed whether or not they chose, so I don't think it was their choice either. As far as I'm aware, it was never confirmed.
We do know that it was a place given to them.
Yeah.
That alone is a bit weird, but that's not the main thing, though. That's just something I realized while I was talking about it. But the big thing is that the only pro-faunist movement in the show is this organization called the White Fang, which is, to put it bluntly, terrorists. It is the classic revolutionaries are automatically evil because they're too violent and their methods are misguided and there's no like alternative shown within the narrative. It's Killmonger. It's what's another example of this?
Let me think.
Magneto in the Fox movies.
They're the Zions. They're like the Zions from Tales of Symphonia. They're basically the Zions, which are basically half-elves who decided, you know what, fuck people treating us badly. Let's just give us more reasons to treat us badly by being assholes. That's basically what the White Fang is.
Oh, also the Scoia'tael from Witcher. The Scoia'tael from Witcher, another big one there. Like I'm specifically thinking of the games because but especially in like the first book, The Last Wish. But anyway, point being, this is kind of a long-standing problem within the fantasy genre with flat racial metaphors written from a white liberal perspective. This problem is not unique to Rwby, but with Rwby, they try to act like it has a depth that it hasn't quite reached.
It is not as black and white as some people think, which I'm sure Adam will talk to in length in a moment. But I just want to put that out. It is not the same as the Zions.
The biggest problem that most of the critics will agree on from what I've seen is that the lack of any counterpoint, the lack of any like alternative movements, separate groups with different tactics and different methods and different viewpoints, like the lack of diversity of thought, essentially.
Exactly. That is not that is a problem. I will acknowledge. That is a valid argument. I will acknowledge.
So, and the fact that it's raised this big issue, and then the main faunist character is essentially a token princess who has left the revolution behind and is mainly just trying to assimilate. And like we meet her and we don't even know she's a faunist because she wears her hair ribbon to cover up her cat ears.
Like a bow.
Yeah, exactly. Like she's literally a token.
I wouldn't call her a princess, though. That's a big misconception.
She is literally the daughter of the leader of Menagerie. So
no. Okay, you know what? Sorry for interrupting, but I need to address this misconception for a moment. Okay, so on the topic of Blake being basically the faunist princess, my stuff / fanfics aside, that is not true. Blake is not like the vice princess president of faunist or Menagerie. As far as we're aware, the chief, Gira Belladonna, was not always the chief of Menagerie. It is not a bloodline thing, like it is.
So you're saying it's an elected position? Okay,
it is highly implied. We even see in Volume 1 a flashback of Blake as a child, all dirty during the rallies. So while the show never outright confirms it, it is heavily implied that Gira, Blake, and Kali, Blake's mother, they were just normal citizens before Gira stepped down as a leader of the White Fang. So 5 years prior to the start of the story, he stepped down, and around the same time, he became chief of Menagerie. But it was that time that Blake also, ran. So chances are she probably wasn't ain't like that big man we see in Volume 4. Like, that is her house, technically, yes. But before Volume 4, she and my her family were not there for very long until Blake herself decided, screw this, I'm joining the revolutionaries. So, the idea of Blake being a princess, huge miscommunication.
I will say that a lot of that stuff specifically, while I agree with you generally, is left up to implications rather than confirmations. Which is a distinction. It is a distinction that I think is worth talking about when we talk about a lot of the criticisms. Is whether something is implication or confirmation.
Yeah, I use the term princess because that is the vocabulary that I saw in the critics thread. So, okay, thank you for that clarification. But the general criticism of Blake's character is that the protagonist's perspective is that of a moderate who is trying to tone down and essentially invalidating the anger. And the other big faunist perspective of Sun is from Vacua, which is the country which, as Ed put it, doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, so Sun is not like a valid point of view about the life thing. He straight up called them evil psychopaths at one point, which, considering his point of view, it's hard to blame him for it, but that also means we can't use him as a valid point of view for this kind of storytelling, because he doesn't know any better.
But the fact that these two perspectives, I left the revolution behind and now realize it was a bad idea, and the revolution are fucking evil psychopaths, those are the two primary point of view that the show presents for this conflict, which is fundamentally about racial liberation and ongoing injustices, both historical and current. So that is the core of the criticism here, and that is what I am not going to push back against at all, because I think it's 100% valid to feel like if you're an ethnic minority, that this show does not see you and does not care about you.
Ditto. There is another misconception about it, specifically from one of the writers, Miles Luna. And I'm going to actually let Adam take over for this bit, because he's more knowledgeable about this stuff than I am.
Thanks. Yeah, so basically there are some slightly more complicated angles to this conversation that tend to get left out. One of the big things is that there is a sense that because of the way this is executed, that the writers themselves sort of fully believe in exactly that way of things, and more importantly, that they haven't ever grown out of that because the show hasn't revisited the White Fang at this point. Having done a lot of research, first of all, right, worth understanding, obviously Montiom was Asian, and Miles Luna is actually Hispanic, but is white passing. So it's not like there's no connection to racial experiences within the people who made the show. So that's one thing that is worth, pointing out. And obviously, that doesn't prevent someone from accidentally, perpetuating, certain things. Like that's not what I'm saying, but I am saying that that tends to get left out of the conversation. There's also a worthwhile acknowledgement to make that, Miles being white passing, there is probably to some degree some of that written into Blake as someone who can hide their racialized aspects, the parts that get them oppressed, but can't fully disconnect. That is conjecture on my part, but I feel that it is, again, something that should be acknowledged when it comes to how these things are written. Now, I did a bunch of research into like the Blu-ray and some of the, general commentaries overall when it came to the Faunus and the White Fang storyline. One thing that is extremely important to understand is that the writers know that they didn't do all this right. They know this. When you critique this show, and you critique this part specifically, it is so important to understand that they are not coming at this from a place of finger wagging so much as a place of learning. They weren't fully educated on everything yet. They have gone on record saying that when they started with this idea of the Faunus in this world as an oppressed minority, they initially were approaching it as like an interesting side world building element. And then they were like, wait a second, this is actually a really serious issue, and we should probably make it a bigger part of the story. And that's been a bit of a double-edged sword. When it came to Volume 5, right, one thing that's worth noting is that Blake's speech, which is at the core of the finale of this primary arc, one thing is that it's not just finger wagging. There is an extremely important statement that she makes there, which is that you are all looking for simple answers to a very complicated problem. And that is a valid criticism of a lot of social justice movements, particularly when we look at the ones that sort of are created online these days. I think it's a really valid thing for people to understand that there is a very human impulse towards looking for something simple. You just, you get power over the other people, and then you're in charge, and then they can't hurt you anymore. And that's simple. And it's not, to be clear, an actual legitimate representation of a lot of social justice organizations, of the actual organizing work. That's where this falls short. The White Fang should have been, at the very least, only one perspective, and that there is also organizing work that offers something different. Instead, we just have the White Fang, and we do have this, I think, extremely important point that people should think about more, which is, am I looking for simple answers, or am I acknowledging the work that actually has to be done? Unfortunately, it is packaged within this, this kind of Killmonger type situation, unfortunately, where Adam Taurus, not me. Adam Taurus is an abuser, and he is a very well-written abuser, in my opinion. And the way I like to look at it, while acknowledging all the flaws, is that Adam Taurus is essentially a grifter who uses left-wing rhetoric to hijack a legitimate movement full of legitimate grievances.
Even assassinates a different leader who is said to have been using different tactics, except she only got like 2 minutes of screen time in the one scene where she is murdered. So a common fix that people propose is giving her more screen time.
And a lot of people who even love Rwby generally agree with that.
I certainly agree. Like, should she survive? No. This is gonna be a hot take. No. I think her dying in Volume 5 isn't a problem. It moves the story on the White Fang. It just shows, we're no longer a revolutionary... We're no longer a revolutionary army that are willing to use violence, but are never willing to take the next step. Then comes Adam, kills the leader. It's like, okay, now we're gonna take the next step. But since it's Adam, he clearly doesn't give a shit about anything outside his own ego. So my idea is just, instead of just letting her survive, would have been like, let us see her before. That way, her death, in my extension, does shift from her White Fang to Adam's. It's more impactful. And this is one thing a lot of people say, critique, but in my opinion, I think it works for a specific reason I'll get to in a moment. Notice how the White Fang are, to put it bluntly, black and white during the first 3 volumes, but only to Volume 4 and 5, mostly 5 do they get nuance, right? Like, you notice a shift between White Fang for the first 3 volumes to Volumes 4 and 5. You can notice a big shift, right?
Absolutely. And again, that is part of them very much learning, right? You can see how they move to a point where, like, the deaths of White Fang members becomes actually, like, weighty, instead of just treating them as mindless goons.
That was not my point, but still true. My point was, at least from the perspective of our heroes, Rwby, Weiss, Blake, and Yang, they saw them the same way we did. Oh, just a bunch of mindless goons who obviously don't know what they're doing, just here to cause trouble. But then come Volume 3, where the world quite literally opens up. And Blake specifically during Volume 4, she finally starts accepting help and stops being a poison, at least in her mind. And because of that, the White Fang can now be more nuanced as a result, because Blake's perspective on things has shifted. So has Weiss's, and so does everyone else. At least that's my in-universe play. So that's why I don't mind, at least to me, I don't mind the White Fang being mindless goons in the first 3 volumes. I understand why people would not like that, but to me, it works because that's how the girls saw both them and my section of the world. There are good guys, there are bad guys, the White Fang are bad guys, and a story. Like, that's the point. At least that's what I think is the point. And why there's such a big shift between how they treated then and how they treated after, aside from the writers learning better.
There's certainly different angles you can take in how you can recognize the way things shifted. But regardless of how you can view the early seasons versus the later ones, I think it is undeniable that especially once you introduce Ilya, right? Ilya is super underrated, and she is a gray area in the White Fang story that does not tend to get a lot of focus. She is not necessarily choosing between like violence and non-violence. That's not what her story is. Her story is about the seductive nature of Adam's arguments, where when you feel like there is nothing else you can do, someone just saying, all right, let's just kill all the bad guys, is really seductive.
He uses her very justified anger at the world against her. That's what Adam does. It's both her and the White Fang. They use their, honestly, very justified anger and make those a weapon.
Yeah.
And because it's something worth noting, I don't know whether this is good or not, but you could argue that a lot of the White Fang members are kids. Like, obviously the veterans are adults, but like most of the goons, you could argue they're 20 at the oldest, I feel. Because remember, Blake joined full-time when she was 12. Like, she was a member before, but she was the full-time member, she was 12, so she's a kid. And Ilya, I don't know if her age was ever confirmed, but to me at least, I think it's safe to say that she is younger than Blake. Like,
Does that make Adam a groomer?
Potentially. There are some people who definitely believe that. That's a lot of the stuff in the White Fang arc itself. There's definitely a lot to criticize, but there's also things that get overlooked, and those things should be part of the conversation. And then the other thing that I think should be really part of the conversation, and this is where we can move on to some other stuff too, just as a bridge. Part of the conversation is we need to talk about Robin Hill.
Yeah, the goat that unfortunately gets too much shit. Thanks, Ironwood Dick Writers. We'll continue
Robin
soon.
is the best.
Robin is amazing, and she is the other perspective on fighting civil rights that we needed during the White Fang arc.
It took a while, but the fact that we at least got it at all should be at least an achievement and a sign that the Rwby are learning and acknowledging the criticisms they are.
Yes.
Like, they're acknowledging that. Robin is proof of that. Also, she's voiced by Christina V, the best voice actress in the world, so by default, she's the best character in the series. Don't add me.
I think best character in the series might be a bit of an exaggeration, but
I'm mostly joking.
Because, like, okay, so before we talk about Robin, though, we need to talk about Ironwood, because Ironwood is the context which gives birth to Robin's significance.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Eric.
Okay, so Ironwood. Remind me what he did in Volume 2?
Okay, so quite literally, the first scene, he brings a big, like, I don't know how many ships. I think it was 3 very big ships, with his own ship being the largest one, and a few other ships to a kingdom, uninvited, during times of peace, while they were preparing for basically the Olympics. Because, okay, for context of the Olympics, there's this thing in the show called a Vital Festival that happens once every 2 years where all the 4 kingdoms are united together so they can basically beat each other up in a big tournament. Yeah, I would decide, let me bring my army to that kingdom uninvited. And
show of force to show that we can invade them with robots at our leisure.
Which, oh boy. Okay, what this feels like, that is like if Germany or Japan went to, like, a place where the next Olympians would be with an army. Everyone just looks at them funny. They're like, oh, they're just for protection.
Wait a second, didn't Lenny Riefenstahl literally do that in Triumph of the Will?
Wait, he did? Oh my god, he did! I forgot about that. But
Lenny
no, it's basically that.
As a lady. But yeah, like, one of the most famous Nazi propaganda films was actually a quote-unquote documentary about the Olympics that were held in Germany.
Yeah.
In the
Anyways,
30s, I think it was.
I bring this comparison up because a little thing of the lore of the story, which I wish was delved into more, is that 80-something years ago, a big war happened between Mantle, which was basically Atlas 80 years ago, along with Mistral, but it was mainly Mantle. Basically decides, hey, let's start a war. I'm not going to go into the concept of the war itself because it's not important for this year, but just know they started a war, they got their asses kicked, and then Atlas, again, future Mantle, which is now run by this bastard over here, decides, let me bring my army uninvited to another kingdom. I'm sure it's just for safety. I'm sure nothing bad will happen. Literally the first scene that we see him. Literally the first one. If you don't see this as a red flag, I don't know what to tell you, because that is a massive red flag.
There's also a lot of very intentional mirroring between Atlas and the United States, like calling Atlas the greatest kingdom, and Atlas operating, and sort of declaring itself the world police, basically.
Also, the heavy influence of industrialists like Vice's dad and the She Dust Company. Like the fact that they have essentially a fuel monopoly company as a major presence in Atlas is another U.S. parallel.
Yeah.
Not just that, but something that people don't talk about as often. There are not supposed to be any real militaries in Remnant after the war. That was not supposed to be a thing. That was one of the agreements. Like, no more monarchies, no more kings, no more militaries, none of that shit.
Where was this information dispensed?
It was one of the, at least the king's part, that was in the World of Limit. I think the no armies bit, that's more so implied. But the fact that Atlas is the only one with the real military should tell you that something isn't right.
It's at the very least a different culture that should be thought about as, like, what is different about their culture that they decided they needed a massive military, and none of the other kingdoms thought, yeah, we should also have a massive military, and instead they invest in the huntsmen and huntresses, whereas they're sort of combined in Atlas. Eric, you had a whole bunch of things you wanted to say. Let's go back to you and your comments on Atlas.
Thank you for the refresher on Ironwood's introduction.
No problem.
Which was the main point I wanted to get, which is the main point because it's been so long since I saw Volume 2.
Yeah, just 3. Happy to help.
Yeah.
Happy to help.
Yeah, thank you. So, the thing with Ironwood is that what actually happens in the show, we touched on this before, where after Volume 3, there's that massive shift in this tone and style after the fall of Beacon. The big narrative beat is this immortal witch named Salem. I'm oversimplifying, but basically there's this immortal witch named Salem who controls all of the monsters which are called Grimm.
Which are basically demons. The Grimm are basically demons. That's all you need to know for the context of this story. For this video, I should say.
Oh, no, there's one more detail about Grimm that are relevant here to the discussion here because it becomes a major plot point.
Oh, yeah.
Grimm are attracted to fear.
Negative emotions, not just fear, it's negative emotions as a whole. Fear just happens to be the biggest source, but the show basically clears negative emotions as a whole. Sadness, anger, etc.
Okay, I thought it was mainly fear.
Fear just tends to be used the most because it's what Salem can best weaponize.
Okay, anyway. So, we have this. So, Salem presents a massive apocalyptic threat, so much bigger than the White Fang that she's basically the reason the White Fang gets sidelined. Because she is so much of a bigger problem. Like a world-ending problem.
Yeah, kind of hard to focus on racial storytelling where there's a literal demon queen supposedly trying to destroy the world.
But interesting point, we don't actually know Salem's true goals or motivations. We know some history given to us from sources of dubious reliability.
Well, Jin is generally reliable, but Ozped is not.
But we also don't know what she didn't say because the question asked was, what is Ozpin hiding from us?
Yes.
Not what is true. But anyway, that's a tangent. Point being, Salem is this massive threat that I is responding to with what I'm about to talk about.
Mhm.
Because of the threat of Salem, Ironwood is making a choice to essentially close Atlas's borders and build up a really, really heavy military presence inside his own borders, ostensibly to protect the capital and the kingdom. He is essentially building Atlas into more and more of a military dictatorship as volumes 6 and 7 progress.
The original plan for that was, I'm going to gather my army, I'm going to make it as strong as possible, then I'm going to tell the world about Salem. That was the original plan, mind you. Tell the world after he gets his army ready, and then use his army to defend the kingdoms, since, obviously, if the world alone, by the way, there's an immortal demon queen trying to destroy you all. Obviously, that would attract fear, which would attract Grim. So that would give Ironwood a basically an excuse to basically occupy other nations. That was his original plan.
Which is also hella sus, by the way. Like,
very sus.
Breaking it down like that, yeah, no. He's essentially using the presence of a fifth party, so to speak, as an excuse to invade everybody else for their own protection. That's imperialism, just straight up imperialism.
And while he never said it outright, we know for sure that was his plan, because that was what he tried to do in Vale. I already mentioned how he was introduced in Volume 2, but here's a little something that a lot of people tend to forget. Let's talk about how Volume 2 ended. Ironwood was at the night, sulking, because of course he was. And then Glinda, they talk about trust, blah, blah, blah. And the very next day, the breach happens, which is, that was a big Grim attack there. They stop it. But then Ironwood uses the breach as an excuse to basically take over security for the Vital Festival, while also putting Ozpin's position as Headmaster at risk, all the while asking him to trust him.
Ironwood is essentially a growing fascist movement. I'm just not going to beat around the bush. That's fascism. As Ed so clearly pointed out, as so eloquently pointed out, Ironwood has always been this authoritarian type. He's always been warmongering and ambitious, and so his turn. One of the common criticisms for this storyline is that his turn was too abrupt, and suddenly he's a murderer and he's trying to kill a kid, and it's like, no, he's always been like this. But that's not my point. My point is that Ironwood is building up the military of Atlas, and the key thing for this storyline with Robin, which was the original point that I've been building to, is that he has been prioritizing military security, using the military to enforce security on Atlas at the expense of the citizenry. He has robotic drones patrolling the streets. He has facial recognition software being run on cameras and camera drones and stuff. It is very dystopian. He's enforcing a curfew. He is doing all this stuff and he's also diverting so many resources toward building the communications tower that he was planning to use to inform the world about Salem. He is diverting so many resources in that direction, and he is putting citizens at risk, if not outright hurting them, through this intense military presence and security-focused scrutiny. And Robin is saying no.
Yeah,
Robin is saying that lives matter. Robin is saying we need transparency. The people of Mantle need these resources more than whatever secret project they're going to.
Obviously, it's important to know that Robin didn't know about it, but even if she did, she still would not let that shit slide. Because, there's a giant fucking hole in the wall that's supposed to protect Mantle from Grim. And the resources Ironwood is taking from Mantle are supposed to be to fix that goddamn wall.
So Robin, and the thing is, Robin is fighting on multiple fronts. She is a very smart activist leader. She is fighting on multiple fronts. She is running for city council. She is operating within the existing channels to make change. She is doing the right thing. In fact, one of the major turning points is election night.
Yeah.
One of the major turning points for the series is the election night, where she is winning, by the way.
Yeah, she was winning.
She would have won without
and-
Watts' interference, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she would have won.
Like, there's literally a stolen election in this season. It is fantastic, but it's
Yeah.
stolen by the fascists, and it's great.
Yeah.
She's doing things the right way. She's running for city council and making her voice heard politically, but she's also doing direct action. She is stopping supply convoys and directly confronting the problem at the source. She is actively working to get those materials to where she believes they are most needed, which is in the hands of, the poor of the citizens of Mantle. More context: the Mantle is kind of a lower city in a crater that was created when Atlas was transformed into a flying fortress city. So you have Atlas, which is the upper social strata, very fancy, very luxurious, and very wealthy. And then you have the city of is it called Mantle?
It is called the City of Mantle.
I remember there being a confrontation, but it didn't go. But it did. She confronted them and she blocked the road and made the request: "Give us these resources. Don't make, or we do this the hard way." But in the end, they managed to talk her down, and she let them pass.
Yeah.
So that was a confrontation that did not have to turn violent and did not turn violent. In that scene, she is showing incredible restraint in a way that somebody like Adam would not.
Would never do.
Yeah.
Like that. So that is the way in which we see Robin as a counterpoint and that alternate perspective that was needed.
So, first of all, it's really important to point out that Robin's happy huntresses, as they're called, which are her closest allies and the people she works with most directly, are a faunus, a big black butch woman, and a trans woman. And those feel like intentional choices. And Robin herself is also a woman of color. So those feel like very intentional choices, especially when we look at Adam Taurus, who looks like a white man.
If I may, there is something about what a lot of people also forget, specifically during the council bit. When the kids are talking about how Robin is winning the election, I would very clearly is not happy about that. Now, there is something we need to bring up. He does not like Jocks either. Rightfully so. He's an asshole. An abusive father, terrible CEO, fuck Jocks.
But he does seem to prefer Jocks over Robin.
And the reason for this is because he could theoretically control Jocks. He hates him, but he could use him. He could control him. Jocks can provide him with the Iowa needs, and they can sort of work together like that. He cannot do that with Robin. He cannot control Robin the way he could with Jocks. So combined with the other two councilmen we later see that clearly and rightfully do not like Ironwood's shit, putting Robin, who is a lot louder about her dislike for this dude, and not only that, basically he ruins Ironwood's chances of doing what he does, because he, for some reason, has 2 council seats. So by default, he gets 2 votes on the council. And there are, like I said, there are only other 2 councilmen in the council. So 2 for 2, but because Ironwood has Robin, he wins by default. If Robin did get the election, that's a 3rd person on the vote. So the only way Ironwood could realistically tell those 3 to piss off is through martial law. But I feel like even that would cause him troubles, because in this scenario, there would be 3 people arguing against him in the council. That's why he, as much as he also does not like Jacques, the fact that he prefers to work with him over someone who very clearly gives a shit about people should tell you a lot about Ironwood himself.
Because historically, fascism finds more allyship among corporate interests than populist ones, even if they use populist rhetoric to initially build the movement.
Yeah. As with the White Fang arc, I made sure to go into the behind the scenes stuff for Robin, and specifically the Blu-ray commentary. I can confirm that there is a clear shift in the way that they talk about a political storyline. There is, like, for example, when in that first scene when we meet Robin, like that was initially going to be much later, but they introduced her early, and they specifically wanted to introduce her in a way that indicated that she and her happy huntresses were out there consistently. Like, this is something they do regularly. It is not like they don't just work on an election. They don't just stage a protest every now and then. They are consistently out there causing good trouble. That is something that she regularly does, and that is why people in Mantle like her. She is out there actively standing up for them and putting herself really in harm's way. But it's worth noting, right, that the happy huntresses are huntresses, right? They are prepared to defend people when necessary. They won't necessarily pick a fight with Ironwood or, his Aesops. If Grimm come, they can handle them. If they are fighters, and they recognize, but they also recognize, like, they don't have to be actively violent to be fighters. They can have that in them and be recognized as people who can handle themselves and who can protect protesters, and that still matters, even if there isn't necessarily an active threat of violence. If, the fact that Robin can defend herself does mean that when she stands up to Clover, who is the one of Ironwood's ace operatives, he knows that if he decides to try to arrest her, she won't necessarily go quietly, and he doesn't want that mess either, right?
It's worth noting that there was a very good chance that, okay, so because of that scene, right in the middle of the evacuation, because there was a big Grim attack in Mantle, and they needed the evacuation, and at the same time, Ironwood did the message, not to the entire world because Ebony wasn't finished, so he did it to just Mantle and Atlas instead. Yeah, by that, the evacuation was going on, but right before they could finish, Ironwood halts the evacuation and call all forces back in. One of the forces being Crow, Robin, and Clover, who had just finished beating Tyrion's ass and getting him to jail. In the middle of their flight, they get a message from Rwby about, hey, Ironwood was an asshole, and now he just basically said, fuck the world, Atlas is the only one that matters, peace out, bitches. That's basically what he did, and she fights back. A lot of people say, oh, if she just stood still and they waited, they could have talked it out. No. Here's what would have happened if they did just stay quiet and left. Crow would have been arrested on the spot, because there's no way he would have been able to get to Ironwood in time. Even if he did, Ironwood would not listen to him. And chances are, they would arrest Robin as well, just by default, since she was there. And they know, if you're not an Atlas, you're an enemy. Enemy, basically, off with their heads or just go throw them in jail. So even if Robin didn't fight back, it wouldn't end well for her or Crow. A lot of people say they would have been fine if Robin just stood up and sat still like a good girl, but no, it would not. It would not.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to respectability politics, which is the insistence that minorities and oppressed peoples need for them to sit still and behave. That's a common through line with a lot of these narratives about revolutionaries. That's the thing that, okay, I don't know if I'm articulating this very well.
It's all right.
Yeah.
Take a moment. Get your thoughts
idea
together.
that Robin should have stayed still is kind of the same idea that fuels narratives like Adams. It's like there's a binary perspective between Adam and doing nothing.
Yeah.
And Robin is someone who deliberately challenges that binary thinking by being purposefully disruptive but strategic in order to minimize harm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Robin is like you said earlier, she embraces diversity of tactics really well, right?
Mhm.
Like, again, she may or may not be doing some slightly illegal things to make sure people are getting fed and housed and all that stuff.
If legal means soldiers harassing citizens, then legal does not equal right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
for sure. And she makes
She
sure she doesn't get caught for those, so that she can still do things elsewhere. This is not us, just to be clear, this is not us advocating for doing illegal things necessarily.
I will advocate for
But
details.
We do not
Just-
try this at home, kids.
do not try this at home.
Don't try to help.
But the law does not necessarily mean that it is just. And Robin makes sure that she understands the law of Mantle and Atlas and the social dynamics between Atlas and Mantle. She understands all those things so well, and that's why she is so effective, because she can operate on the ground level, just making sure people are protected, fed, housed, etc. And she knows exactly how to be disruptive in the most effective ways possible in terms of obstructing injustice. And she is also challenging things via electoral politics, not just because Mantle needs to have a voice on the council, but also because if she wins an election, it is a statement about the direction that people want things to go. That is part of what electoral politics can be, is that they can be statements. It's not necessarily just about winning the election. It is about recognizing what people actually want and the things that they are willing to demand. So Robin is this perfect development of the social justice narrative. It is a recognition of where they fell short in the White Fang arc, and an intentional course correction in pretty much every way possible. And one thing that's really important, I think we need to talk about to some degree, is the overlap between people who say that Adam, should have. They criticize the way the White Fang arc handles things, and they criticize it coming across finger waggy or whatever, the neoliberal.
Like the narrative that Adam should be more complicated or morally gray, or
Yeah.
should have had a redemption arc. But
And then the same people often criticize the actions that are taken against Ironwood and blame Team Rwby and Robin and such for his eventual fall into outright fascism.
Okay, since you brought up Ironwood again, there is one point I'd like to raise about Ironwood, which is the one flaw in how his arc is executed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
in my opinion, a major flaw. Okay, so first context, one of the major traits of fascism identified by Umberto Eco in that essay, every breadtuber cites at one point or another fascism. I mean, it's a good essay and is widely cited for a reason, but
yeah.
One of the major traits is identifying an outside enemy, a them, like creating an us versus them narrative where the them is both infinitely powerful and pitifully weak, so that we can still overcome them because we are the strong, we are the master race, etc.
Yeah.
That is one of the core tenets of fascism, is labeling usually a minority group, like, say, Jews or trans people.
Or faunus.
Yeah, this concept will be faunus.
Or immigrants.
Yeah.
Or faunus. Or Salem. Within Ironwood's rising fascism, his outgroup is Salem. His outside enemy that he uses to justify his actions isn't faunus, it's Salem, which is, within the narrative, a real threat. I was literally just reading an article about Freeland earlier today. I haven't seen Freeland, but the article was talking about how there's a trope in fantasy media where Actually, no, the Titans are a better example of this, actually. The Titans in Attack on Titan.
Okay, I was about to ask what Titans are you talking about?
I'm sorry. Yeah, no. Better example is the Titans in Attack on Titan. I'm sure we're all familiar. That is actually a very good articulation of fascist rhetoric, except the narrative leans wholeheartedly into it. And then things get really complicated and messy and wishy-washy, but basically the idea of the outside threat is completely valid in this constructed fantasy world. That is one problem. That is one layer within the construction of Ironwood that I would consider potentially problematic because it does not identify the ontological evil rhetoric as a lie, as it is so often in real life. But the pro of the upside of this particular creative decision is that it makes Ironwood feel sympathetic, if not outright reasonable, while he's speaking. It's only when you step. At least this is how I experienced this story. It's only after I stepped back a bit that I realized, oh wait, he's actually way out of line. But like, he makes a persuasive argument for why his militaristic, martial law type measures are necessary. Except it's still predicated on a narrative in which the unstoppable threat is actually real and not a lie, as it is so often is in real life.
So
anyway.
I have a read on this that I think people might find interesting. To me, right, when it comes to, well, first of all, I think there's probably a line worth drawing to some degree between authoritarianism and fascism.
Good point.
It's probably not like a massively thick line, but I would say that for Ironwood, he is not necessarily he is an authoritarian in that he expands and expands and expands his control, but he is not necessarily a fascist in the sense of deliberately creating a fascist system.
That's a valid point.
The way that I look at Salem is that Salem is like climate change, right?
She's a force of nature, right?
She's a force of nature. And so, like, the idea of, like, treating her not as a fascist other, but as a impending catastrophe and a force of nature that it's easier to just sort of be like, well, we can't do that much, so let me just exert all the control so I can protect everyone from the thing that's inevitably coming. But, like, I'm not gonna, like, try and really do much about it, so much as just, I'm going to make sure that I have everything possible to protect people from the result, from the impact of this natural disaster, or force of nature, or whatever. Or at the very least, you can sell it that way, right? You can sell it as, listen, there's this massive thing, can't be stopped, just let me protect you. Just let me protect you. And then all your troubles will go away. And, like, let's ignore all the things that are contributing to those troubles, like economic instability and prejudice and discrimination and all that stuff. And let's just say, boy, there is this massive thing coming down the line, and it's the only thing that matters. And if I protect you from that, then everything's great.
Yeah. So essentially, what you're arguing is that it's not he's not actually intended as a depiction of full fascism. So I can see that. My critique doesn't quite land. Okay, I can see that actually. Yeah.
And as I sent you guys an article on, there is this brilliant acknowledgement that really part of what Ironwood is he is a deconstruction of the classic lone male hero that makes the hard choices archetype.
Link that article in the description.
Yeah, for sure. For sure going to.
The deconstruction of the singular lone hero is just so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of what's brilliant about doing that with Ironwood specifically is an acknowledgement of how some of our traditional views of heroism really work very, very smoothly with authoritarianism. And that we really need to center things on these collectives, these coalitions, the way Team Rwby does, the way, Robin Hill does, because when we do try to look towards, singular savior with all the power who could protect us all in the way that a lot of our media does, really, it is not super far from authoritarianism. And, you can say, well, we'll only give that power to someone we trust. But the point of Ironwood is that when they give themselves that role of, I make the hard choices, who is there to challenge them? The other people don't have to make the hard choices. So it's like they have no moral ground to stand on.
Like Seesaw!
Yeah.
From Invincible. Sorry, Adam and I talk about Invincible a lot. So I'm just drawing that connection. Sorry.
Yeah.
Aha.
I love Invincible so much. But that is not an acceptable punching bag, except maybe Ambu, but no. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, different conversation, but you're not wrong either.
But yeah, like, and also Ozpin. Ozpin is another part of that dynamic of that whole making the tough decisions, he's taking this burden on himself to lead the world against Salem, except the narrative makes it so clear that he doesn't have all the answers.
The narrative also makes it clear that the hard choices that he makes are not actually hard. The actual hard choices would be, hey, let me actually start treating people as equal and ask for help, ask for advice, and work together. That was always the hard choice. Notice the two big backstabbings that Ironwood does about trust and how he himself just does not give a shit about trust or loyalty. Oh, him and Ozpin are arguing during Volume 2 about how Ozpin rightfully says, hey, maybe you shouldn't use your army recklessly against this threat, especially when most people don't even know about the threat. What is Ironwood's process? Like I said earlier, he basically backstabs Ozpin, uses a real tragedy to basically sabotage and put his own position of power at risk to raise himself up, and even have the goal to ask him to trust him. Then the martial law stuff. When he realizes, oh shit, Salem is coming, Cinder basically playing me like a fool, what do I do? Oh, wait, Rwby went behind my back because she talked about Abe, who I don't like, even though Roy was never there to begin on, just a selfish bastard? Okay, let me bread them as traitors and put all of Atlas to the sky and basically abandon the entire planet and let Remnant fend for themselves. That is somehow the hard choice. The hard choice is basically telling people to fuck off in my way or the highway. Instead of what the show constantly shows, the hard choice is just humility and asking for help when you clearly need it. That's always been portrayed as the harder of the two choices. So that's why Ironwood, as Adam went in that, works as a deconstruction of the lone hero doing the hard choices, because realistically, Ironwood never did any real hard choices. He always picked the easiest route that works for him.
Yeah, he always chose to grow his strength instead of taking a risk and being vulnerable. Okay, so we've just spent a lot of time talking about Ironwood and how he's actually kind of weak and stupid, and we also spent a lot of time singing Robin's praises. I want to balance that a little bit.
Okay.
And point out the one place where Robin is limited. She is completely unprepared to deal with people like Watts and Tyrion.
She is.
Mainly because she lacks information and context. And
Exactly.
for that, she needs Team Rwby's help.
Yeah.
And she gets Team Rwby's help. So and she's also like, and the fact that Ironwood is keeping her in the dark about what the secret project and stuff, like, she's acting on limited, in good faith, on limited information, but her information is still limited. That limits the scope of what she's able to do, and it also leaves her vulnerable to sudden surprise attack on election night.
Yeah.
That ultimately serves to frame Penny as an out of control rogue AI.
On the point of lacking information, it is worth noting, nobody, up until Volume 8, nobody knows, and I mean the writer world, nobody knows who she is or what she does, or she isn't. Nobody does. She is an unknown factor. Nobody knows about her, which is the point. And that's the reason why I wanted the message of first to make people know about it.
Oh, and that was the whole political move of building up.
Amity.
Yeah, the Amity Stadium. That was the whole point of rebuilding the
Yeah.
Amity Stadium and broadcasting the message to the whole world to create that rhetoric.
Yeah.
So that he could use that threat to his advantage.
Yeah.
That's
He
what I
said
was
he wanted to unite the world, but uniting the world, in other words, isn't let's all work together. It's let everyone work for me. That is his way of uniting the world.
Yeah, it's under the Atlas banner, and he is Atlas in his own mind. So ultimately, I mean, it's the imperialism, and, in some ways, to some degree, it doesn't really matter how he rationalizes it. It still has the same impact. He could have the best intentions in the world, but the fact is that his own personal flaws put him in this position of, I need to be the one in charge, and also Atlas is the best kingdom in the world, so if I'm in charge of Atlas, and Atlas is the best, then if everyone else is protected, quote unquote, by Atlas, everything will be great. We could do whatever. And of course, when he finds out that Salem is not able to be killed, that punctures this big hole in him and sends him absolutely spiraling as soon as Salem actually pops up in front of him, which is, of course, why there's a lot of criticism about Rwby and co deciding not to tell Ironwood for a good while that Salem can't be killed.
The thing about that, the reason they kept it secret was because they still weren't sure if Ironwood could be trusted, and he was already kind of sus in their opinion.
Right.
Not helped by them already being betrayed by the two previous headmasters, literally the last 2 seasons.
And they were also fully aware of the cognitive dissonance of them demanding that Ozpin be straight with them and reveal the secrets, and then keeping secrets from Ironwood. They were aware of that cognitive dissonance in constantly questioning their decision to keep the secret, and even after the fact realized that maybe it was the wrong move and got them branded as traitors. So it was the wrong move tactically. Who knows? But I still think it was the right move in terms of principles and uncertainty and managing expectations. There was really no right decision they could have made in that position.
Yeah, I mean, when they came into Atlas, they immediately saw a place basically under occupation.
It was a police state.
Yeah, a police state, literally. Yeah, like you said. In terms of the criticisms of Ironwood and the Atlas arcs, I think the best way to sum it up is that there's a lot of better internal justifications for why everything is happening than people are ready to admit. And the other last point about Ironwood I'd like to make is that he is such a sympathetic and well-written authoritarian villain. So sympathetic and well-written that I think he got a solid portion of the audience on his side right up until the point where he tried to kill Oz. I think that that's part of the dynamic. I'm not going to be 100% unilateral about it. It's just a theory. His rhetoric is persuasive.
Absolutely. He is written to be right in a lot of cases, or at the very least for his work to make a lot of sense. And credit where it's due, right? He was right that that getting the word out to people, telling people about Salem, was the right call. He was right about that.
Yeah, I would shit a lot, but one thing I will agree with him is how Ozpin handles Salem, if I tell you the whole thing with Salem, the White Fang, etc., back in Beacon, and how he basically made it all secretive. I understand why Oz did it, because, if they knew about this, it would bring fear, if I said Grim, etc., but they wouldn't have to worry about that if they just talk to people and let everyone be on the know. So
yeah, actually, there's real research about this. There's actually real research about this in organizational communication, where I have a communication degree,
Cool.
I didn't think it would actually become relevant here, but
You're welcome.
but there's actually real research about organizations that are that communicate more about problems they're facing, like internally with their employees. Like a company that is open about problems they're facing within internal communication will also be trusted and believed more when they share good news. So actually sharing the bad news and being clear with employees about this stuff is good for maintaining employee loyalty and engagement. I was reading about this in the context of business communication, but I think the general principle still applies here. Like, yeah, this is something that research the subject in general has shown.
Yeah.
That sharing, that disclosing to the public would actually allay more fear in the long run because people know what's happening.
That is one thing I will agree about. Osman did not hold the secrecy right at all. And I was like, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this. Which, obviously, there's another problem. I was kind of a hypocrite about it, but that's not the point I'm here. The point is that he was right about that much. At the very least. Which I will give him a point to that.
Yeah, like he was fully informed and he was what makes him so scary in my opinion is that he was operating in good faith with full information and still descended into an authoritarian police state.
Yeah.
That's what makes him so chillingly scary to me.
Yeah. Which, with all of that in mind, I think this makes for a pretty good segue to the Rwby are the true villains of the story.
Oh,
And
shit. How about we pause for a break? Because it has been 2 hours. I need to refill my water. Sure, y'all are in a similar situation.
oh yeah, I mentioned Adam earlier, but yeah, we can talk a lot about break. We're here for 2 hours.
Let's take like a 5 or 10 minute break and come back to this, okay?
Sounds good to
Yeah.
me. Thanks so much for listening. This has been our first episode of Punching Back, an acceptable punching bag defense podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. This was really fun. Obviously, this is not the end of the conversation about Rwby. We have a second episode that might already be out, actually, but if it's not, I'm sure it'll be out very soon. So please keep your eye out for that, or if it's out, there'll be a link either at the end of this video or in the description. So please check that out when you get a chance. And after Rwby, our next punching bag that we're going to be tackling will be Godzilla. Particular version of Godzilla that tends to get a lot of flack, but as with this episode, we'll be tackling a lot of the context around it and the other parts of the franchise and all that kind of thing. We like to be very thorough. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. We would love to know your thoughts. Do you agree, disagree? All that matters is that you're respectful. So we'd love to chat with you in the comments. And I hope that we've been able to give you some interesting thoughts to chew on. And don't forget to subscribe. This has been Adam, aka the Atom Splitter, and I'll see you all soon.